Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Wow, it's hard for me to believe right now, but this is my 500th episode, which doesn't include the various shorts that I have also released. And I wanted to take a moment to personally thank each and every one of you who are watching this video right now, including a special thanks to those of you who have liked my videos and commented on them. And to those of you who have subscribed to my channel, you have my deepest and most sincere appreciation and thanks, because as Out Loud Geek approaches 2,000 subscribers as of the time that I am recording this video, it all began way back in July of 2021 when I had no subscribers. So the channel has most definitely come a long way, and that wouldn't be the case were it not for all of you. Thank you. Now on with the topic. As I had reported in a video that I had released on August 21st, Lucasfilm canceled the Star Wars series entitled The Acolyte, so thankfully there isn't going to be a second season. And while it's evident that the vast majority of Star Wars fans are either thrilled or indifferent to the fact that The Acolyte was canceled, there remains a fringe but very vocal group of far-left woke activists who are practically losing their minds over the show's cancellation. You've undoubtedly heard of this phrase before, the modern audience. Studios have been throwing that term around for the past several years whenever they're trying to promote something that's filled with woke identity politics messaging. But what exactly is this so-called modern audience? In its simplest form, the so-called modern audience is composed of the people that the woke identity politics activists are trying to pander to, who are in fact exactly like themselves, more woke identity politics activists. That's truly all it is. Thus, the so-called modern audience isn't some humongous audience that represents a majority of any particular fandom or even a majority of normies, as woke identity politics activists have been trying to gaslight everyone into believing for years. No. In all cases, it's nothing more than a teeny tiny fringe group of far-left woke activists that are never satisfied with anything that doesn't cater to their ideology, whose sole aim is to impose its own worldview on everyone, to undo anything that they don't like, and to then replace it with what they personally want to see, which includes them viewing the past as an enemy that has to be defeated and replaced, instead of being a rich tapestry of ideas and experiences that they could learn from.
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Weird. So we didn't do that this time.
And this is exactly what I and many others have witnessed happening to many franchises, as the woke activists do their damnness to sweep away everything that came before in order to consign it to the trash heap of history, instead of respecting it and building upon it so that they can fully indulge their own personal narcissisms and self-importance as they clear the way ahead of themselves so that only their ideas, their ideology, and their worldview can exist and nothing else.
But we have 50% of our executive team are women. And 6 out of 8 of the people in my story group are women.
Let the past die. Kill it if you have to.
This is their recurring message. And to be perfectly honest, the woke identity politics activists who have been doing all of this are shallow, arrogant, and self-absorbed, and have probably spent most of their lives being praised and coddled while living inside of their own carefully constructed and controlled personal echo chambers so that they don't have to hear any opposing views, which they themselves proudly admit to, such as the Acolyte star Amanda Stenberg.
Because nerds are gay.
Well, some nerds are very not gay and are very threatened by gay
Well, that's
stuff.
true. But in my world, nerds are gay.
Okay.
And how do self-righteous and narcissistic woke identity politics activists react when something happens that shatters their ideologically based worldview and beliefs? They freak out. So naturally, the Shill access media sites that are very woke themselves are practically pulling their hair out over Disney's decision to cancel The Acolyte because they won't view the situation in terms of the show's reported very low viewership, its unanimously bad audience scores, or its very high production budget of $180 million. Instead, they only want to view this as a defeat for diversity and representation because in their minds, you can't have diversity and representation without their sacrosanct woke identity politics ideology. As I had talked about in my previous video that I had released on August 22nd, because woke identity politics activists view their ideology as being sacrosanct, they won't sit still if any criticism of any show or movie that pushes their ideological messaging occurs. Because any criticism, which might include criticisms based solely on a movie or show's writing, acting, directing, or editing, will still only be viewed by the activists as being an attack on their sacrosanct ideology. And that's exactly how the Shill access media sites are trying to gaslight the general public in the wake of the show's cancellation. So hold on to your hats, folks, because we're about to dive deep into the gaslighting bullshit from the Shill access media. And we'll start with the site Autostraddle, which released an article on August 20th entitled Disney Plus Cancels First Star Wars Show Made by a Lesbian. Here's why that sucks. Then, skipping to the article's second paragraph, it reads as follows. Word on the street this week is that Lucasfilm has pulled the plug on The Acolyte just a little over a month after its first and now only season concluded. It's a beyond disappointing decision not only for fans of the series and its characters, but also for how it speaks to the way major corporations like Disney decide what sort of stories they want to tell. Regardless of how you shake it, the Star Wars show that was produced by a lesbian had a non-binary lead and a cast of queer and POC performers, and a narrative that didn't rely solely on nostalgia and brand recognition was given the axe. And that just sucks. In other words, if a studio produces content that's intended for a broad audience, instead of trying to pander to small specific groups, that just sucks to this article's author, because to him, spending exorbitant amounts of money to unprofitably pander to small specific groups is apparently the way to go. Unsurprisingly, there's no mention anywhere in this article about the show's Nielsen viewership numbers, its very high $180 million production budget, or its very low audience scores on Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, and Metacritic, because none of the facts apparently actually matter if you're a woke activist. Rolling Stone released an article on August 23rd entitled, Can the Best of Star Wars Survive the Worst of Its Fans? And the subtitle reads, Before Star Wars can have another successful show, some vocal parts of the fandom have to reckon with what they really want out of the franchise. In other words, this article is a gaslighting hit piece on the Star Wars fandom, which I can easily demonstrate by showing you what's written within it. When George Lucas debuted his science fiction epic about a galaxy far, far away in 1977, Star Wars went from a long-shot space opera into the highest-grossing science fiction franchise of all time. And I have to correct the article's author by pointing out that Star Wars is a science fantasy franchise at best because it has never purely been science fiction. Almost 50 years and one sale to entertainment conglomerate Disney later, Star Wars isn't just a one-off world. And Star Wars never has been just a one-off world, so watch out folks, here comes the gaslighting from Rolling Stone. There have been prequels, reboots, standalone television series, and an in-depth theme park edition. There has never been a Star Wars reboot, and there have been additions to multiple theme parks, not just one. So that's just gaslighting from Rolling Stone, and he left out the failed, permanently closed, and once overpriced Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser Hotel. But like most popular culture, the Star Wars fandom, especially online, has become inundated with loud, conservative, and in some cases incredibly racist voices. Here we go. If you don't like something that Disney releases that has a diverse cast, then according to Rolling Stone, you're a racist. Sounds a lot like the accusations that Amanda Stenberg was spewing, doesn't it? Of course, the way that the article's author wrote that sentence shows that he or she regards all popular culture to be racist. Perhaps the article's author should consider whether he or she is simply projecting their own behavior onto others. While Disney has never said these voices are directly impacting what shows get made, the vocal minority of Star Wars devotees keep limiting what they'll accept as true Star Wars. The author of this gaslighting Rolling Stone hit piece has probably never bothered to watch much pre-Disney Star Wars to understand how Disney has mutilated the franchise, nor does the author provide any evidence to support his or her claim that only a minority of the fandom doesn't like what Disney has done to the franchise. But what the author of this hit piece article is attempting to do is to gaslight readers into believing that it is only a tiny minority of Star Wars fans who don't like Disney Star Wars. And that's simply not true because all of the physical evidence of failed movies, failed shows, failed High Republic books, and a failed overpriced Star Wars themed hotel at Disney World proves otherwise. These fans say they're fighting for Star Wars' future. But if their endless fantasy world can't accept any stories that they don't recognize, some of the self-professed biggest fans in all the worlds could be closing themselves off to any future at all. I'd rather have seen Star Wars be left alone than transformed into the garbage that it now is by Disney, and I have no doubt that most fans feel the same way. What is crystal clear is that before Star Wars can have another successful show, the loudest voices online need to realize the Star Wars they want to return to never existed in the first place. Will the real Star Wars please stand up? People who watched Star Wars long before Disney bought it and subsequently ruined it thanks to Kathleen Kennedy know exactly what the real Star Wars is, the original trilogy and the prequels that were created by George Lucas. So the article's author either doesn't understand these most basic of facts about the Star Wars franchise, or is attempting to gaslight readers into thinking that no one knows what the real Star Wars is, which would be utter nonsense because longtime fans know exactly what real Star Wars is, just as I said it was. And what has failed the most under Disney is any movie or show that Kathleen Kennedy's Lucasfilm has produced that has veered the farthest from George Lucas's original vision of the franchise. And The Acolyte by Harvey Weinstein's former personal assistant Leslie Headland is the biggest failure of any Disney Plus Star Wars show, just as Nielsen's viewership data easily demonstrates. But the Rolling Stone article then continues down the all-too-familiar path of accusing Star Wars fans of being racists and sexists, because if you don't like Leslie Headland's The Acolyte series for any reason, then that's this article's author's only conclusion. In other words, it's all the fans' fault, but not the fault of those producing the horrible content that hardly anyone is interested in. And like the previous article that I had talked about, this Rolling Stone article never mentions the show's actual Nielsen viewership numbers, but it does attempt to downplay the show's $180 million production budget by only saying that it was over $100 million. There's also no mention of the very low audience scores on Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, and Metacritic because, again, the actual facts apparently don't matter. And we can't have a discussion about the woke shill media without talking about the Mary Sue website, which published this article on August 23rd entitled, "I Guess Star Wars Isn't Interested in Women's Storytelling." And the article's author, who's a woman, immediately says how she was immediately endeared to Harvey Weinstein's former personal assistant Leslie Headland because she told the audience at 2023's Star Wars Celebration in London that she used to write Star Wars fan fiction. And according to the article's author, upon hearing that, she knew that she was going to personally fall in love with Headland's show, The Acolyte. Talk about admitting to confirmation bias. She then goes on to say, "That was the moment I knew that Star Wars was finally making something with fans like me in mind. They brought out the cast, and it was immediately clear that so many people who have historically been left out of the narrative would see themselves reflected in this story." In other words, there was apparently no Princess Leia Organa, Queen Amidala, or any other female characters in George Lucas's Star Wars, according to the Mary Sue. Nor were there any people of color like Lando Calrissian or Mace Windu. The Mary Sue just loves to gaslight readers. The article's author went on to write, "And I did fall in love. It was a Star Wars show that finally centered the female gaze." And apparently the term female gaze, according to Wikipedia, is a feminist theory term referring to the gaze of the female spectator, character, or director of an artistic work, but more than the gender, it is an issue of representing women as subjects having agency.
Oh, goody, goody! Oh, goody, goody, gumdrop!
The Acolyte breathed new life into the franchise with brand new, compelling characters, incredible fight scenes, and an explicit enemies to lovers storyline. So I guess Dave Filoni's live-action Ahsoka series that aired last year on Disney Plus wasn't loaded with enough female principal characters in it either. She continued writing, "So you can imagine my complete disappointment when Deadline broke the news that The Acolyte will not be getting a season 2. And here's where the finger-pointing blame game begins in this article. Of course, anything that doesn't cater to cisgender white heterosexual masculinity has a tendency to bring out the trolls. From the beginning, the show was plagued by negative backlash from so-called quote-unquote real fans. There you go, folks. Attack the male fans just like Kathleen Kennedy did before The Acolyte had even premiered, and then call anyone who dared to not like The Acolyte a troll. This is exactly how woke identity politics activists think. Forget the facts and just blame all problems on one specific type of individual based on their race, gender, and sexual orientation, especially if they don't uphold their sacrosanct ideology. She went on to write, "It's hard not to feel a bit of betrayal here. I have loved Star Wars all my life, even when it wasn't particularly marketed to me." So she loved Star Wars when it wasn't, in her own opinion, being marketed specifically to her, which means that it didn't need to be marketed to her in order for her to like it. She admits to this in her own article, but then she also apparently always believed that Star Wars should personally pander to her instead of being for everyone. This is how woke identity politics works. Pander to specific groups with no regard as to how anyone else actually feels about it. Oh, and by the way, here's what she never mentions once in her article. Nielsen's viewership data for The Acolyte, Disney's $180 million production budget for the show, and the very low audience scores for the show on Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, and Metacritic. So studios spending an exorbitant amount of money to produce entertainment that panders to an itsy-bitsy teeny-tiny narcissistic minority of far-left woke activists is what she and other woke activists want. Their so-called modern audience. That's what it all boils down to, and that's what they got with one season of The Acolyte, but they wanted more because the cost doesn't come out of their pockets, and they could totally care less about the rest of the audience that didn't like the show. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.